I'm in my class here at MCAD where I'm teaching Advanced Project Studio, which is a semester-long class where we do just one project. And in this class, we are designing the identity for a film festival. So the students have, well, I'll just back it up. It's April 14th or something like that today. April 15th. It's April 15th today. And at this point, I have seen a poster for this film festival probably twice. I've seen a ticket. I've seen a t-shirt. We have been in class since late January. The reason that I'm only just seeing actual sort of agreed upon deliverables after essentially months of working illuminates a lot of how I think about the design process. I've actually seen work every single week now since early January. I saw preliminary research into potential genres of films that they could program in their film festivals. Then I saw a chosen direction for their film festival, along with programming of those films and names for it. And I saw a deeper dive of research. Then I saw analysis of that research. Then I saw an insight, which is like the kernel that's inside a design concept. I saw a presentation on those. Then I saw sketches of ways to communicate that insight. I probably saw 25 of those, pencil sketches one week. Then they shelved that. The next week I saw more iconic treatments using bed node diagrams. Then they went and they took, so now we're up to like 50 well thought through concepts. Then they took 5 of those and made a rough, good enough comp where the only thing I care about is like, is the type serif or sans serif? I don't care what sans serif it is. Really the only things I care about is that those rough comps have accurate information in them, but the details don't really matter. The big thing is like, how much stuff can you show to get the point across? Then, and only then, do they pick one of those and then design the real poster polished up. Now, that probably tells you a lot in terms of how important I think the process is, how important research and ideation and sketching are. But there's another aspect to this, which is that typically when you design an identity system, you don't spend 8 weeks just getting to a poster. You would start with the traditional identity materials like making a logo or picking fonts and developing a color palette. We didn't do that. The reason that we don't do that is to design a good logo is going to take them roughly the same amount of time that it took to make this poster, except that there'd be week after week of critiques of the inner workings of this logo. And no matter how great the logo is, at this point in time, we wouldn't have solved any problem besides the logo. By starting with the poster, once it's time to make a system and to make additional collateral, we've solved or started to solve a lot of other problems. By default, we have a logo. It's whatever way the name of the film festival was typeset. We have a secondary font potentially. We might have a color palette. We might have an illustration style. We might have an iconic illustration. But we're starting to get a bunch of assets together. So then what happens is as they design other stuff, they're going to run into situations, a use case, where what we currently have doesn't work. That's going to be like, okay, cool. Explore that design problem so that you can expand the system that you've developed. By the time you get to the end, there will be a design system. It's just going to be extracted from all that stuff that we've made. And the other thing that happens is because we've done such a deep dive into the research, at every phase, new opportunities might come up, whether it be in the social media or in the environmental graphics or whatever, where instead of just relying on the system, you can go back into the research and be like, oh, well, we could do a thing with quotes, or we could do a thing with these kinds of photographs, or, there was this illustration technique that I looked at in my earlier comps that makes sense to use here, even if it's not part of the system. So this kind of the funnel way of working, where you have a lot of stuff at the top and it drills down to a fine point at the end, one of the things that's great is it generates so much extra stuff that you can use, but then it also makes you really well acquainted with the project because you've been solving problems the whole way. Now, to be clear, there's nothing wrong with designing an identity system and starting with a logo. I just think you need a lot of time to do it. Now, these students don't really need as long as it took just to get to a poster, but we had to do that because it was important to break down the process as granularly as possible to show the difference between research and analyzing the research and developing an insight and sketching concepts. Actually, I left something out. There's a point in the process we didn't talk about, which is the insight, and then developing concepts from the insight that are just sentences. Then they're sketching based on that. So all of that stuff, this like super rich process, it could have happened in a much shorter time frame. If this was a full-time job, it could have been done in 2 to 3 weeks. But because I want them to really understand the process, it had to unfold over this much longer period of time. But the big thing is and why I'm sharing this is the way a lot of us work or have been trained to work, to me, seems really stupid. Once you start to really separate out the steps of the design process, the idea that someone would ask you for a concept in a week is the dumbest idea ever. And it explains why it's so stressful and why there's so many people working weekends and working late, because the method does not match the ask. The actual conceptual design process requires time. It just does. It requires time, and I think it requires a methodology. And when you have it, the results can be beautiful. But when you don't have it, it's crazy stressful. And one of the things that it's really fun to watch with this project unfold is when I didn't used to require so many steps in between and a really granular understanding of what they were, a lot of times students were still tweaking the main deliverable at the very last class, and they hadn't really made a big enough dent in all the other stuff that I needed to see, like motion graphics and social media and environmental graphics and the program and the t-shirts and the merch and all this stuff. But when the process gets granular and rich, you do all that work up front, and then each successive point is a smaller and smaller piece of the pie and easier to execute. And that's why, in my view, if you want to work in a conceptual mode as a default, you should have a longer range of time, and then there should be ways of working around shorter deadlines that are still gratifying to you. Because what I think is a dumb idea is that your deadline is short, so the way that you have to work is no longer gratifying. What I aspire for is when the deadline is 2 days or a week or whatever, I want to make sure that I have a way to do that that is fun and that is gratifying and that is still capable of generating good work. That's why the MVA has 4 methods, and I am telling you about these methods because I don't think you need to be miserable either. I don't think you need to be working over the weekend and it's unnecessary. I don't think that you should go broke doing projects. I don't think you should be losing your hair and going gray over a frickin' poster. Stuff takes as long as it takes. Just because it seems like it's just a postcard or whatever doesn't mean that it doesn't take as long as it takes. But if you switch the process, it can take less time, but you have to understand that you now operate in a different zone. All right, have a good night.